She called the cops on me while I was unloading boxes. Can you believe that? I wasn't doing anything wrong. No loud music. No arguments. No mess. Just me. A truckload of memories and a few cardboard boxes filled with toys, clothes, and books. For my daughter, it was a warm, breezy morning by the lake, the kind of peaceful day you look forward to all year. I had taken the weekend off work to help my daughter move into our old family cabin for the summer. After her recent divorce, she needed a break from the noise of city life, and I figured the cabin would be perfect. Nestled by a quiet lake, it had been in our family for over a decade. I used to bring her here as a kid. Now she was bringing her own children, full circle, right? But peace didn't last long. Just as I carried the second box labeled kitchen stuff up the steps, I heard the crunch of gravel under heavy heels and a sharp voice cutting through the air like a saw. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" I turned to see her, mid-50s, perfectly pressed blouse, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other, sunglasses perched like a crown of authority on her forehead. She had that look people wear when they think they're in charge of everyone else's life. I wasn't even on her lawn. I was on my porch, my family's porch. She stormed closer, her eyes darting between my boxers and the cabin. "You can't just move into someone else's property without notifying the HOA. She barked. "This is cabin number 14, correct?" I blinked. "Yes, and I own it," she scoffed, pulling out her phone. "I don't believe you. I've never seen you here before, and I know every resident on this lake. I'm calling the sheriff." I laughed, thinking she was bluffing. But she wasn't. She walked to the road and dialed 911 like she was reporting a break. I could hear her clear as day. "Yes, there's a man illegally moving boxers into cabin 14. He says he owns it, but he doesn't live here. I'm the HOA president. Yes, he's trespassing." I stood there stunned. My hands were still wrapped around the flaps of a box full of stuffed animals. What was I supposed to do? Run? No. I set the box down slowly and sat on the porch step, watching her pace back and forth like she'd just uncovered a criminal operation. 15 minutes later, a sheriff's cruiser pulled up, followed by another. 2 deputies stepped out. One walked up to me calmly while the other kept an eye on Karen, who was still narrating every movement I made as if she were hosting a reality show. "Sir, we received a call about someone unlawfully entering this cabin," the first deputy said. I nodded and reached into my glove box for my ID. Then I pulled out the folder I'd brought with me. Inside was the deed, dated 11 years ago. "I own this cabin," I told them, names right there. "My daughter and I are just settling in for the summer." Karen marched forward, trying to interrupt. "That's not true. I'm the president of the HOA, and this man didn't file any MAVA notice. Number 10 agreement. No parking waiver. He doesn't belong here." The deputy turned to her and asked, "Ma'am, can you confirm that this property is inside your HOA's jurisdiction?" Karen froze. "Well, I mean, it's part of the lakeside community. All these homes are technically, the deputy asked, or legally." She stammered, then looked away. The second deputy had been checking something on his tablet. He walked over and said, "This cabin falls outside the registered boundaries of the HOA. It's not listed under any act of association." I could have cheered. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. She looked like she wanted to scream, but didn't know how. "So," I asked the officer, "am I free to keep unpacking?" He smiled slightly and nodded. "You're good. Sorry for the inconvenience, sir." Karen didn't say another word. She turned and marched off, heels clicking. Like gunshots on the stone path, I stood there watching her leave, shaking my head. I'd come here to help my daughter start a peaceful new chapter in her life, and within an hour, I'd been treated like a trespasser on my own land. But as frustrating as it was, something else started to creep into my mind. Why did she think she had any authority here? Why was she so confident this cabin was under her HOA's control? I decided I wasn't just going to ignore it. If she was wrong about me, how many others had she harassed? How many families had their weekends ruined just because Karen decided she didn't like how they looked, talked, or parked? I knew right then I was going to find out, because if she thought calling the cops on me was the end of the story, she had no idea what was coming next. I watched the deputies drive off, dust kicking up behind their cruiser as it rolled away down the gravel road. Karen had stormed off in the opposite direction, clutching her phone like it was a sword she'd failed to swing properly. I stood there on the porch, still in disbelief. It wasn't the confrontation itself that rattled me. It was the fact that she genuinely believed she had the right to police my property. I had owned that cabin for more than a decade. It was passed down from my uncle, a quiet man who loved fishing and hated noise. He used to say, this place was made for peace, not problems. Yet here I was, barely an hour into my visit, already wrapped in neighborhood drama I hadn't signed up for. I picked up the box again, walked it inside, and placed it gently. Near the fireplace, my daughter's old blanket was folded at the top, her childhood books underneath. Everything inside those boxes held a memory, a family, a story. And yet, somehow, to Karen, they were suspicious cargo. That thought didn't sit well with me. I sat down in one of the old rocking chairs on the porch and pulled out my phone. I opened the county property records website and typed in my cabin's address. As expected, it showed my name as the current owner, clear as daylight. But what caught my attention was something deeper in the notes section. A small disclaimer that read, "Not part of the Lakeshore Homeowners Association jurisdiction. Independent lot." Interesting. I tapped into curiosity mode. If my property wasn't under the HOA's control, why was Karen, the HOA president, acting like it was? And more importantly, had she done this to anyone else? I made a few calls. First to my friend Matt, who owned the cabin 3 doors down. "Hey Matt, ever had issues with the HOA?" I asked. His voice dropped immediately. "Karen, don't get me started. She threatened to fine me last year because my grandkids left a kayak on the dock overnight. Said it was clutter and violated shoreline appearance rules. I told her we weren't in her HOA, but she just waved some papers around and said we had to follow her rules anyway. That was enough to convince me this wasn't an isolated incident. Karen was operating beyond her bounds. She wasn't just annoying. She was enforcing fake authority over properties she had no right to control. I called the next neighbor, Ms. Rhonda, a sweet lady who'd lived there for 20 years. Her voice cracked with frustration. Last month, she told my nephew he couldn't park on our own driveway because it disrupted the flow of traffic. I told her to get lost, but she kept writing these fake warning slips and taping them to our mailbox. That's when it hit me this was a pattern. Karen had built a little empire around fear, paper threats, and pretending to have legal power where she had none. I started taking notes, jotting down names, incidents, and even photos Matt sent me of the phony compliance notices. The more I collected, the angrier I got, not just for myself, but for everyone she'd intimidated. It wasn't just about the boxers anymore. It was about control, abuse, and how a single person could twist the idea of community rules into a weapon. I remembered what the deputy said. This cabin is not listed under any act of association. That sentence was gold. I contacted the county recorder's office the next day and asked for the official HOA boundary maps. When they emailed the files over, everything became crystal clear. Karen's HOA covered only cabins 1 through 10 on the East Bank. Mine, number 14, on the South Kerfar outside their territory. So were 6 other cabins, including Matt's and Rhonda's. I printed the map and drove back up to the cabin that weekend, papers in hand. I knocked on Matt's door first. "You want to see something that'll make your day?" I asked. I showed him the map, the boundary lines, the proof. He chuckled and said, "Well, I'll be damned. She's been bluffing this whole time." Together, we walked to Rhonda's, then to the Johnsons, and finally to the Parkers. I showed every single one of them the truth. Karen's authority didn't extend past Lot 10. We were free. That night, we met by the lake for a small get-together. For once, everyone looked relaxed, smiling, like a burden had been lifted, but I wasn't done yet. I knew Karen wouldn't take this lying down, and I wasn't about to give her a chance. To spin her own story, I needed something official, something public. So I called up a lawyer I knew, and together we drafted a legal notice, a cease and desist letter addressed directly to Karen in the Lakeshore HOA. It clearly stated that any further attempts to enforce rules, issue warnings, collect fees, or interfere with properties outside their jurisdiction would be considered harassment and subject to legal action. We included copies of the map, the property deeds, and even statements from affected neighbors. When I walked into the town post office and dropped the envelope into the outgoing mail slot, I felt something shift inside me. Satisfaction, justice, relief. Karen had pushed too far. And now, for the first time, she was going to be pushed back. I didn't know exactly how she would respond, but I was ready. I wasn't just defending my cabin anymore, I was defending everyone she had scared, bullied, or lied to. And one thing was for sure, this story was far from over. A few days after sending the cease and desist letter, I returned to the cabin to spend a long weekend with my daughter. I brought my grandkids along too. It was meant to be a peaceful family time, just us, the lake, and the memories we were creating. But as I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something strange. A freshly printed sign was hammered into the ground near the trailhead between my property and the lake path. It read, in bold red letters, HOA access. Only trespassers will be fined. I froze. This was new and illegal. That path wasn't just part of my property's access, it was public easement, long recognized by the county. I got out of the truck and walked straight to the sign. It was cheaply made, zip-tied to a wooden stake, but it was enough to scare someone off if they didn't know better. My daughter came out of the cabin, a confused look on her face. "Dad, is that real?" I shook my head, pulling the sign loose from the post. "Nope, this is Karen's doing. She's doubling down." Sure enough, I found 2 more signs, one at the dock and one nailed to the oak tree at the edge of the shared beach. All said the same thing, some variation of HOA area. Keep out. My jaw clenched as I realized what she was trying to do. She wasn't just bothering us. She was trying to erase us. Make it seem like the whole area fell under her control, that anyone outside of her circle didn't belong. But I had the truth, and the documents to prove otherwise. I took pictures of every sign and sent them to my attorney. He responded immediately. That's grounds for a complaint. We'll file with the county. But I wasn't satisfied with just legal action anymore. I wanted the community to know exactly what Karen was doing. I printed copies of the official HOA map, highlighting the real boundaries, and started passing them around. I even made a simple flyer that said, "Not in the HOA. No, your rights. Don't be fooled." I left them in mailboxes and posted one on the bulletin board by the general store, the only one in town. Within 2 days, I started getting calls and texts from neighbors. Some were shocked. Others were angry. A few admitted they had paid maintenance fees to Karen for years without questioning it. That was the tipping point. One neighbor, Doug, who owned a larger cabin at the end of the road, said he had paid nearly $2,000 over 3 years in mandatory community dues that he thought were legit. Turns out, they were completely fabricated. Karen had sent invoices that looked official, with HOA letterhead and account numbers. But after digging into his deed, Doug realized what I had already proven: his property wasn't even in the HOA. That meant Karen had pocketed thousands by pretending she had authority, where she didn't. That wasn't just manipulation. That was fraud. I compiled everything: photos, testimonies, invoices. The county Mapan submitted a formal complaint to the local housing and community board. The woman at the front desk raised an eyebrow as she flipped through the pages. "You're not the first person to mention her name," she said. That told me everything. Karen had been playing this game for a while, but finally, she had been caught. The board promised to open an investigation. Meanwhile, I noticed Karen's demeanor had changed. She didn't march down the trail anymore. No barking orders, no clipboard in hand. She kept her distance, but I could feel the tension from across the lake. She knew something was coming. One morning, as I was having coffee on the porch, I saw her standing at the edge of her lot, watching me. She didn't say anything, just stared, arms crossed, as if daring me to come over. I didn't. I just raised my mug and gave her a little nod, the kind that says, "Game's over." Later that week, the county sent a representative to inspect the area. I walked with him, showing where the fake signs had been posted. The old trail Karen tried to claim, and the boundaries clearly marked in their records. "This isn't the first HOA overreach I've seen," he said, shaking his head. "But this is one of the boldest." He took photos, asked a few questions, and promised follow-up. The next day, all the signs were gone. Quietly removed, like they'd never been there. But people noticed. Word spread fast. Suddenly, Karen's name wasn't being whispered anymore. It was being spoken loudly, and not with respect. I heard that one family who had been too scared to use the beach before was now out with their kids every afternoon. The atmosphere around the lake changed. It felt free again. Not perfect, but peaceful. Still, I knew Karen wouldn't give up easily. People like her rarely do. She started posting passive-aggressive messages in the HOA newsletter about ungrateful residents and outsiders who refused to follow common courtesy. But it was all noise. The facts were out. The boundaries were clear. The lies had collapsed, and I wasn't done yet. I decided to go one step further. I organized a neighborhood meeting for everyone outside of the HOA. We met by the dock one Saturday morning. Folding chairs set up in a circle, fresh coffee in hand. I shared everything: my story, the documents, the threats, the signs, and the victories. People opened up. They shared what they had endured. We laughed at the absurdity of it all, but there was also anger, betrayal, and then something beautiful happened. We decided to form our own informal alliance. Not an HOA, not a club, just a group of neighbors who looked out for each other, respected each other's space, and promised to never let someone like Karen dictate how we live. We called it the Lake 14 Circle, a simple name, but it meant something. That we belonged, that we had reclaimed our space, that we were done being pushed around, and I knew, deep in my gut, that Karen's days of unchecked power were finally coming to an end. About a week later, I received an official letter from the county office. It confirmed what we had all known by now: Karen's HOA had overstepped its legal boundaries. The letter stated that the HOA's jurisdiction stopped at Lot 10, and any enforcement or collection attempts beyond that point were not only invalid, but could be considered a violation of county civil code. There it was, black and white, stamped and signed. I took a deep breath, finally feeling a weight lift off my chest. I called my lawyer and asked if it was time to take the next step. He said, "If you're serious about shutting her down, this is your green light," and I was very serious. That's when I decided to go public. I wasn't going to be quiet about this anymore. This wasn't just about me and my cabin. It was about standing up for every neighbor who had been bullied, lied to, or manipulated by Karen's fake rules and scare tactics. I made copies of the letter and included a short, easy-to-understand summary explaining that any homeowner outside lots 1 to 10 was not legally obligated to follow HOA rules, pay HOA fees, or adhere to any of their so-called guidelines. I highlighted Key points, added a simple map, and made 100 copies. That weekend, I walked door to door every cabin from lot 11 through 18. Most people invited me inside, offered coffee, and shared stories. Some had been fined hundreds of dollars for violations like leaving lawn chairs out or hosting weekend guests. One woman, a widow named June, showed me an actual notice she had received threatening legal action for parking her car in her own driveway without HOA approval. That one made my blood boil. These weren't just control tactics. They were straight-up intimidation. I handed her a copy of the county's letter and said, "They never had power over you. June, you've always been free." She teared up. I don't think anyone had told her that in years. By Sunday evening, nearly every neighbor on our stretch of the lake had a copy. Word spread like wildfire. And then something incredible happened. People started pushing back, not just with words, but with action. Doug, who had paid those phony fees for years, demanded a refund through certified mail. When Karen didn't respond, he threatened small claims court. Rhonda put up her own sign by her driveway. Private property, not under HOA, no Karen zone. It was hilarious and empowering. Even the quiet couple from Lot 17, who never attended anything, wrote a letter to the HOA, officially revoking any assumed agreement. We were a united front. That Monday, I received another call from the county investigator assigned to our case. He told me they had completed a preliminary review and were preparing a formal citation against the Lakeshore HOA for misrepresentation, unauthorized enforcement, and fraudulent fee collection. They'd have to pay a fine and correct all documentation, including removing any HOA signage outside their legal zone. The next day, a notice was posted on the community board. In large bold letters, effective immediately, Lakeshore HOA. Jurisdiction limited to lots 1 through 10. All enforcement and communication to non-member properties must cease. Karen was furious. She stormed down to my cabin like a thundercloud. In heels, she didn't even knock, just stood at the base of my porch and shouted, "You think you've won? You've made a mess of this community." I stood up, walked calmly down the steps, and looked her dead in the eye. "No, Karen, I cleaned it up. You made the mess the day you decided fear was more powerful than fairness." She opened her mouth to argue, but I handed her a copy of the county citation and the HOA boundary map. "Your authority ends at lot 10. You ever step foot on my property again, I'll file for harassment. This isn't personal, this is legal." She looked like she wanted to scream, but there was nothing left to say. Her lies had collapsed. Her illusion of power shattered. She turned around, muttering something under her breath, and walked back up the road slower this time, as if the weight of everything had finally hit her. Over the next week, the HOA signs were removed. One by one, they disappeared from trees, fence posts, and docks. The trail path was cleared, and the fake restricted access markers were gone. People began enjoying the lake again. Families set up picnics. Kids rode bikes without glancing over their shoulders. The neighborhood felt alive. My daughter, who had been hesitant to stay at the cabin at first, finally said, "Dad, it feels like home again." That was everything to me. But I didn't stop there. I wanted to make sure this never happened again. So I worked with my lawyer to draft a declaration, an official document filed with the county records, clearly stating that my cabin and all properties from lots 11 to 18 were independent of the Lakeshore HOA. We made it public and helped any interested neighbor file the same declaration. That meant no HOA could ever claim control again, not now, not in the future. We didn't just remove Karen's grip, we sealed the door behind her. We even threw a celebration. Not out of spite, but out of gratitude. We called it Independence. At the lake, everyone brought something: cookies, lemonade, barbecue, folding chairs, kids played, dogs ran free, and for the first time in a long time, no one looked over their shoulder or worried about a clipboard showing up. We had music, laughter, and stories around the fire pit. And I stood there, watching it all unfold, knowing that this wasn't just a win against Karen. It was a win for community, for honesty, for freedom. Karen didn't show up that day. I'm not sure she ever will again. But if she does, the signs are clear, the rules are real, and the HOA, it's been permanently banned from our side of the lake forever. Summer rolled into early fall, and for the first time in years, the lake community actually felt like a community again. The air was lighter, the trail was open, and people started waving to each other like neighbors instead of hostages. Children played by the water without being scolded. Porch lights twinkled warmly at dusk, and no one had to worry about a passive-aggressive letter being taped to their door. The shadow that had loomed over our cabins for so long, Karen and her rogue HOA, had finally lifted. I remember waking up one morning, stepping outside with a cup of coffee in hand, and seeing my grandkids racing down the gravel path toward the dock. No clipboard in sight, no scolding, no threats about noise violations, just laughter echoing across the water. My daughter joined me on the porch, wrapped in an old quilt. "You know," she said, "when I first got here, I wasn't sure I could stay. I thought it would feel like hiding, but now, it feels like we belong again. I smiled at her, because that's exactly what I had fought for. Not just to ban an overreaching HOA, not just to stop Karen's harassment, but to give my daughter and her children a place where they could breathe freely, without someone constantly looking over their shoulders. Of course, Karen didn't just vanish. Her presence lingered, if only in reputation. Occasionally, I'd catch a glimpse of her in the distance, walking stiffly around her part of the lake, sunglasses on, head high, but gone were the days when she'd march over uninvited, barking about violations and infractions. Now, she stayed in her lane literally and legally. I heard through the grapevine that several HOA members had started questioning her leadership. Some even stepped down from the board, unwilling to be part of the embarrassment that followed the investigation. Apparently, fines had been issued against the HOA for fraudulent activity, and at least one cabin owner was pursuing legal action to recover fees they had paid under false pretenses. Karma, I thought. Not instant, but always on time. As for us, those of us, beyond the reach of the HOA, had formed something far more powerful than any homeowners association could ever be. We built trust. We no longer needed fake rules and fines to maintain our homes or get along. We looked out for each other because we wanted to. Someone's mailbox broke. We fixed it. Someone's dog got out. We helped find it. We hosted potlucks, late cleanup days, and movie nights on the side of a barn with a white sheet and a projector. No board meetings, no dues, just genuine connection. That, to me, was real community. And maybe the sweetest moment of all came one crisp Sunday afternoon. I was chopping wood out back when I heard a small voice behind me, my granddaughter. She looked up at me and said, "Grandpa, can we stay at the cabin forever?" I paused, setting the axe down gently. I knelt and hugged her, whispering, "As long as you want, sweetheart. No one's going to make us leave," because that was the truth. We had reclaimed our right to be here, not by shouting, not by fighting dirty, but by standing up, getting informed, and refusing to be bullied. That was the lesson I hoped my grandkids would carry with them. Not that the world was fair, it rarely is, but that you don't have to accept unfairness as the norm. You don't have to be silent when someone abuses power. You can push back. You can speak up, and sometimes, when you do, others will rise with you. That's exactly what happened on our stretch of the lake. We didn't just remove Karen. We rewrote the story of our neighborhood. What started with a few boxes and a false 911 call turned into something bigger than I ever imagined. We weren't outsiders. We weren't rule breakers. We were people who loved our homes, respected our neighbors, and refused to be bullied. And now, every time I walk down to the dock, or see kids playing in the shallows, or watch a neighbor string up lights for a barbecue, I'm reminded of what we gained: peace, freedom, and the knowledge that we're not alone. I still keep a framed copy of the county letter inside the cabin, right above the fireplace. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that no matter how big someone tries to make themselves, no matter how many fake rules they throw around, the truth always finds a way to the surface. And once it does, it can't be silenced. Karen may have ruled with fear, but fear only works until someone refuses to be afraid. I was that someone. And because I stood up, others found the courage to do the same. That's the story I want my family to remember. That's the legacy I want to leave behind, not just of owning a lakeside cabin, but of fighting for what's right, of standing on your own land and saying, "This is mine, this is home," and no one, not even a power-hungry HOA, present, can take that away. So if you're ever faced with a Karen of your own, remember this: you don't have to yell, you don't have to fight dirty, you just have to know the truth, hold your ground, and never back down. The rest will take care of itself.